a moment. All right. Hello, welcome to the National Book Critics Circle conversation about translation with Gwendolyn Harper, translator of the 2024 Barrios Book and Translation Prize winner, A Last Supper of Queer Apostles by Pedro Lemebel, and Mandana Chaffa, NBCC Vice President of the Barrios Book and Translation Prize. I'm Rebecca Hussey, here in my capacity as NBCC Vice President of Technology, and I'm your tech host for the evening. So I just want to go over a few housekeeping details before I introduce one of our speakers. So if you want to enable closed captioning and view a live transcript, click Show Captions, the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. You can click View Full Transcript to view the transcript in the side panel of the meeting. And we have Mylin Hill joining us and offering ASL interpretation. So thank you so much for being here, Mylin. We'll have time for questions and answers later in the session. So if you have a question, we ask that you use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So you can ask a question at any time. We'll bring it into the conversation later. Ask as many questions as you like. I'll be monitoring questions, and I'll also post relevant links to introduce Mandana Chaffa. Mandana is a writer, editor, and critic whose work has appeared in a variety of publications and venues. She's the founder and editor of Nowruz Journal and an editor-at-large at the Chicago Review of Books. She serves on the boards of Brooklyn Poets, the National Book Critics Circle, where she's vice president of the Barrios Book and Translation Prize, and co-vice president with me of membership. And she's also the president of the board of the Flowchart Foundation. Born in Tehran, Iran, she lives in New York. So welcome, Mandana.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. And Mylin, I'm always thrilled that our sessions about books and translation include your own very necessary translatory brilliance. So you all know this, but I'm going to read it anyway. Gwendolyn Harper's translation of the Chilean writer Pedro Lemebel's The Last Supper of Queer Apostles won this year's National Book Critics Circle Award in translation and is currently longlisted for the American Literary Translators Association's National Translation Award in prose. She has received numerous fellowships from the Robert B. Silvers Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Jan Mikulski Foundation. Over the years, Gwen has written and translated for Poetry, N+1, the Paris Review Daily, Two Lines, Caravan, Public Books, and Latin American Literature Today. Currently, she's on staff at The New Yorker. Welcome, welcome, Gwen.
Thank you. Such an honor.
The honor is definitely ours. And I've been looking forward to this for so long. We've been talking about it for a while. So I thought I might actually start us off with an excerpt of the lovely appreciation that our terrific long list committee judge, Hannah Weber, wrote for A Last Supper of Queer Apostles in Words Without Borders earlier this year. In 1925, Virginia Woolf recorded a single positive review for Mrs. Dalloway in her diary. This time you have done it. You have caught life and put it in a book. Perhaps this is the only way to summarize Pedro Lemebel's The Last Supper of Queer Apostles, a dizzying chronicle of queer life in Chile, from false lashes at AIDS-era funerals and the dance floors of Santiago to democracy's false promises and the memory of a brutal dictatorship. A multidisciplinary artist and activist, Lemebel often arms his chronicas with his favorite weapons against fascism, irony, and camp. And while they all have the shape and texture of poetry, they're positively electric with political critique. He claims, I could write with the silence of the Tao while stuffing my adjectives under a disciplined tongue. I could write with no tongue, like a newscaster on CNN, no accent and hold the salt. But why would he? This collection is a gift, kinetic and intoxicating. The very existence of an English translation of a work lambasting Western homogeneity is already food for thought. The opening chronica invites us to sit in the tension. I'll never write in English. With any luck, I say, go home. Well, pass the salt. So I think we could start off by taking Hannah's advice and passing the salt, Gwen. I mean, there's so many directions for us to start from, like the varied streets in Lemebel's Chile, but maybe we could start with what ends Hannah's appreciation. I'll never write in English. With any luck, I'll say go home. And I rather love that friction because indeed he didn't write in English, but without you, his words, his essential self would be lost to so many of us that are so appreciative of it. Though I wonder if perhaps he was referring to English not as a language, but as a symbol of empire.
Yes, I feel like he definitely was. Thank you again for having me. It's so great to be here, and the NBCC continues to be like a amazing thing that has happened to me. Yeah, I feel that in a way, I talk a little bit about this in the introduction, but in a way, I think he's not so much talking about himself. I interpret it not so much as himself writing in English, but almost the way that as um, other literatures reached the US, many other countries were reading American writers for a long time, but it was only really in the second half of the 20th century that we started to read a little bit more broadly. And there was the moment of the boom, the Latin American boom, where you get all those big writers like Garcia Marquez and Cortázar and stuff. But then there's also, this argument people have made about how certain writers started to write in a more almost self-translating way in the hope that they would have this kind of global appeal. And I think that was what Lemebel really refused, was a kind of self-translation into something that would appeal to a a kind of global homogenous audience, if that makes sense. Something that was neutral and palatable.
That does make sense because, and I do want to point out how great your forward was. I am a sucker for a good translator's forward, and I implore all publishers of translated literature to please include the translator's notes. They are as great as the book itself. And from I love what you had to say about the fact that to some extent he also refused to be a traditional Chilean author as well. Like he was standing out from the crowd even in his own home, his own native language.
Totally. I think a lot of we think of Latin America and the US as being quite different, but I think in some ways they really have a lot in common in terms of their colonial histories, actually. And the literature is historically an art of the elite. Like, who writes books, And so I think the literature of Chile for a long time was a really upper class mode. And so, which is not to say that there wasn't sort of art made of words. There's a really amazing kind of rural oral sort of storytelling tradition and joke telling tradition and sort of the kind of trickster figure. Like, there's sort of a lot there too, but in terms of who sort of were writers with a capital W, that was sort of in Santiago among the upper class, and writing in a kind of Spanish that spoke perhaps more to Spain, in terms of that global capacity, global potential, as opposed to back to their own Chilean, other people in Chile and other parts of Chile. So I think Lemebel was really insisting on writing in a Chilean Spanish and writing in a working class capacity that was sort of about bringing that outside kind of language play into um, Chilean literature, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And to be sure, Spain itself is Europe.
Yeah,
When you think about it, it's the same kind of, even though it's the language of Spain, it goes harkens back to saying he doesn't want to write in English. He also doesn't want to write in Spain, as it were, right? He's writing from
right,
a very different perspective.
right.
Um, one of the things that, boy, we could spend a long time just on this alone, certainly the working class background, but he is, I keep using the is, but I don't think he'd mind. He is such a chronicler of a certain life in the 70s. I don't mean just socially, but politically, in terms of, you cannot divorce what was going on politically in the 70s in Chile from what he was writing about. We can talk a little bit later about how he was writing about it, but the political component, I don't think you could ever pull away because even his most kind of joyful discotheque types of things are very political.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've like um I think it's easy. I was telling you on the phone yesterday that it's easy for me and I think other lovers of language to get lost in the puns just being beautiful as, ingenious, sculptures of language. But I can almost, I don't know, you have to really, I can get really involved in that level as a translator. But then when I step back and just sort of remember how deeply it's, um, I don't know, everything he writes is sort of deeply speaking to reality. It's never just sort of um, art for art's sake. It's always about what he's seeing. It's always coming. It's often very funny in a way, like he really uses humor as a tool, but um, it's really from a place, a sense of anger often at what the conditions are. Yeah, I mean, for anyone who doesn't know, Chile had a very tumultuous history in the 60s and 70s where they had this kind of increasingly progressive um, presidents or regimes culminating in Salvador Allende, who was in power from 1970 to 73, but then in 73 was overthrown by a military coup, and then there was a dictatorship for a long time. And much of what Lemebel writes is about that dictatorship period, but also kind of in that the violence of that transition maybe something that we're feeling a little bit in the US these days, the suddenness of it. So yes, he's very much speaking to what went on and is going on for him.
We didn't talk about this, but I'm curious. Well, two things. One, did you feel you had to immerse yourself and get more detail on the politics of that time period in order to affect not the literal verbiage of a translation, but kind of the essence? Because I think there's such an essence of Chile of a certain time and Lemebel of a certain time in this that it's not, I think sometimes people think about translation as a very pristine type of thing. And what I love about this of the work you've done, and certainly modern translation in general, is that I think I use this word with you, like it's the way a director might approach a particular text, where you really are putting in a lot of different flavor. Did you end up having to do different kinds of research in addition to the actual difficult translation of some of this text?
Yeah, definitely. I think I was doing a lot. I don't know if I consciously called it research, but I yeah, I was. I mean, I lived in Chile for several years and there's a real romanticization and valorization of the Allende years in Chile, in a way that's really important and also is really a little bit ossified at this point. Like
Yeah.
it's such a like, oh my God, what could have been political in this for sort of a whole really couple of generations now that um people it's almost hard to know, like, is that the real it feels like you have a lot of access to who the big people were during that time. The music is still played, the fashions are still in fashion, like there's a lot that's really kept up and remembered, but it's remembered through 50 or 60 years of really intense feelings and nostalgia for it. And so I think I both used that as a way to learn more, but also tried to figure out, well, what was it really like to be there then, as opposed to what the remembered version of that is
Yeah,
now, if
I
that
mean,
makes sense.
yeah, it does because we all cultures do it. I mean,
Yeah,
there's the
absolutely.
there's a camelotization, which I realize is not a real word, but English is my second language. So there's a camelotization of, this pristine era, which really wasn't necessarily pristine for everybody anyway. It might have been
Totally.
the conoscenti or the literatura people, but not necessarily for everyone.
Totally. Or if you just and I'm not even thinking of it so more if it was secretly bad or something. It was, there was a lot that was really good. But if you just I just mean that it's in a way that when you tell a story so many times, you almost forget what the nuance of what it really felt like to be there. You're more invested in the version of the story you've
Yeah, yeah, I
created
understand that.
that time, which I feel like is such an interesting process that happens with memory. Um, so, for example, there's a really amazing, I mean, it's very, very famous in Chile. Something that was an incredible resource was a documentary called La Batalla de Chile, the battle for Chile, I guess is how it's translated in English. And it's like 6 hours long. And it was made by this director, Patricio Guzman, he was Chilean. He'd gone, I think, to France to study sort of new wave French filmmaking and wanted to bring kind of new wave French, like, kind of lighthearted romantic movies like back to Latin America. And so then he gets back to Latin America and well, first Allende's in power and he makes something, he sort of works with the Allende campaign on something. And then he starts to think, wow, there is really something is happening here. Like there's a lot of like pressure, and something's going to happen. And so, beginning with the elections, I think in January 1973, the coup happens in September. Obviously, he doesn't know there's going to be a coup, but he just hires a crew and he starts just filming on the streets every single day of 1973.
That's incredible.
So, and he has a 6 hour documentary where you watch Chile collapse. And he talks to people from every walk of life, from every political party. You watch people of all backgrounds and of all political be beliefs. Like everyone was protesting. The left was protesting. The right was protesting. You watch creepy military parades. You watch the cameraman get shot and die. Like it's a really kind of amazing document, and that was um I mean, it's that sort of thing is that gave me sort of more insight than almost anything else into what it was like to be there in 1973, if that makes sense.
Talk about the feeling of no, it can't happen here. And
Yes.
yeah, and when we talked, and actually when I've talked to anybody about this book this year, it's that we loved it and read it last year. A lot of people, as you know, this is an award that is ultimately handed out by NBCC critics, which is one of the things that makes it really special to us, that our members have a lot to do with this. But reading it yet again now, I'm taking it a lot more differently than I did. There are certain things in here that I'm thinking, oh boy, wasn't I naive about a year ago compared to now? And that's what makes this so phenomenal, other than the fact, and I'm going to get into this, that whether or not people in the audience know it, chronicas are exceptionally short, which make it perfect for the 2025, point of view and attention span. Was that also a new thing for Chile at the time? Was that an exceptionally Lemebelish construct to write these
The,
things
the,
so,
the
so
Crónica?
briefly? Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think so, actually. The Crónica has like dates back to the 19th century. What my understanding, anyway, I'm not sure I have the most thorough understanding, but my understanding is that they really emerged with newspapers, the emergence of newspapers in the 19th century. including in Brazil, for example, the writer Clarice Lispector has an amazing book of chronicas that I think you can get from New Directions now. And it was really a space for people who are normally reporters to write in a more I don't know if the word's experimental way, but they didn't have to fact check themselves. They were often used we're often talking about reality, but by the end, we're making a kind of social point, and it was often very based in place, based in, if you're a newspaper publishing in Buenos Aires or Santiago, it's a genre where it's totally normal to say, I was sitting in Plaza X, when a man walked up to me and he said, "Follow me," and so then I followed him, and maybe it's true. Maybe it's not true, but it's kind of emblematic of kind of a local phenomenon that's happening. Um, and by the end, you've maybe made a point about some of the like, wow, we really do need better plumbing in this city or something. Or maybe, and of course, then in the 20th century, like Lemebel and Lispector and many other writers as well actually really made the Chronica its own kind of wild
Vibrant, right? And it's like a vibrant and almost uncontrollable, even though it's structured. It's not just like crazy words on a page, but it does have a life to it, a liveliness to it. That's
yeah.
delightful regardless of subject matter. I would feel remiss if we didn't spend some time talking about um, the social aspects of what Lemebel stood for. Uh,
Mm.
we're going to have you read an excerpt of something, but in general, his not only with respect to AIDS, obviously, which was all over the place in the 70s, and I'm old enough to
Well,
remember.
in the 80s, in the
In the
80s.
80s, I'm so sorry. And that's why I'm too old. I'm old enough to remember what that was, but certainly a lot of the social movements and all. And I think that even the certain words that he used, if we don't really talk a bit about that, we're missing out on the full Pedro Lemebel. It's not just political, it's not just chronicas. Would you want to talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, could you phrase the question
Yeah,
again?
better? Yes, you got it. So when you think about the travestis and all of these other uh people that he was highlighting his own life, it's
Mm.
just as important a part of his role in Chile and also what these chronicas are exemplifying in our world right now. Um, in terms of who he stood up for, the people that he was with, and their importance in his life.
Yeah. I'm not still sure I totally understand it as a question. I'm just like, yeah, yeah, definitely. But I mean something that I think I'm just gonna jump
Yeah,
off that comes to mind.
that's what you're
Uh,
here to do.
Um, I mean something that I think is interesting about the stories he told. I mean often his stories are sort of so fantastical in a way. Like a story that I'm really thinking of is the Madonna story, the death of Madonna, where she it's like this Madonna impersonator who ultimately contracts AIDS and dies, but then you get this kind of coda to the story where it turns out she had been filmed by a this kind of young filmmaker, which is this kind of class tension, who had used her in this art film, which ends up getting accepted to this big post-dictatorship museum exhibition where she then and then a bunch of school children come in and see this video where of Madonna who's nude and who ends up, if I'm remembering, if I am remembering this, I don't know if I'm explaining it very well, but of course there's sort of like some uh genitalia malfunction and um this sort of art film captures all of this, and there's all these school children who are sort of watching this. And I'm like, that did not happen. Like, that's a crazy story. But as far as I can tell, I really dug into it. And every time I looked for evidence that it happened, it was like, oh, this all really happened. So there's a way in which like the stories seem almost too strange to be real, like from the margins sometimes, but they often are real. And but what I was going to say, just based on sort of from what you had been saying, is that they can be hard to know exactly because almost everyone that Lemebel is writing about died. And so, I know many of Lemebel's friends and um, colleagues and sort of professional acquaintances from the latter part of his life, and some of them who knew him for much longer than that. But the world that Lemebel was a part of that is depicted in these books is almost entirely was gone almost by the time he was publishing them. So there's a way that he's speaking in memory of something that's disappearing. He is very much, I think, actively speaking for the working class and actively speaking for, you know, transgender and queer people in Chile. But there's a way that he's also the the individuals that populate his stories are almost not someone he can advocate for any longer. I don't know
Well,
if that makes
yeah,
sense.
no, that's terrific. There's a lot in what you said, both in the sense of a mythology of sorts that he
Yeah.
created uh, with real people, but a certain kind of mythology, and then the greater issue of the erased and the disappeared, which he wrote about and for. Uh, and that's a deeply compelling part of it. And again, yet another thing that I think a lot about when I was rereading this is how many people in the world right now have been disappeared by different kinds of things, whether it's a rampant illness or a governmental thing. And so this feels like such an incredible I'll use the word chronicle, but a line in the sand of all these voices that perhaps would never have gotten full bloom before. I'm thinking before we go too much further, we already have some questions. I'm going to just take a quick look and see if it makes sense to do that. But I'm thinking maybe we could have you read an excerpt. Well,
Yeah.
actually, story because the chronicles are so beautifully short.
Okay.
Perfect subway reading, I say as a New Yorker. But
That's true.
it's like terrific, you know.
I would like
Let
to
me,
think so anyway.
yeah, let me just read another one of these before bed. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to read Letter to Liz Taylor, it's called, or Egyptian Emeralds for AZT. But before I do that, I just would like to say that I'm dedicating this reading to a friend who passed recently. His name was Kent Wright, and he was in his 80s, I believe. And he very much was a gay man in San Francisco who lived through the AIDS crisis. And he was amazingly supportive of this project and very serious writer himself. And he passed. I knew he wasn't feeling well, but he passed pretty suddenly. And yeah, so I'm still trying to figure out ways to honor him and remember him, but this is my first attempt. So,
Very beautiful. Thank you.
letter to Liz Taylor, or Egyptian emeralds for AZT. Oh, and I should say that AZT was the first medication that was shown to have some efficacy against the HIV AIDS virus,
And
though.
impossible to get at that time. It was one of
And,
these things that you really
right.
couldn't get unless you knew people.
Right, totally. It was actually of limited efficacy, I should say, as like a little parentheses, but it was sort of the golden goose, golden, of immense value. So, or Egyptian emeralds for AZT. And so, dear Liz, without knowing if the soft calypso of your eyes will ever read this letter, what's worse, and knowing how busy you are, I'm adding myself to your grand tally, to the infected multitudes who write to ask you for a little something. Maybe an autograph, a lock of your hair, the lace from your slip. I don't know, any trifle that lets them die knowing you received this message. But the thing is, I don't want to die or receive a printed autograph or even a photo of you in Montgomery Cliff in Raintree County. Nothing like that. Just an emerald from the crown you wore in that Cleopatra film, which they say was real. So genuine that a single gem could add years to my life on pure AZT. I don't mean to pressure you with my morbid crocodildo tears or rob you of something so dear. Think of me as freeing you from these gems that have been cursed by pharaohs and that always bring bad luck in the end, luring thieves to ransack your house. And I'm not joking either. You remember what happened to Sharon Tate. Nothing funny about that. Not to mention the wisps of gossip, the vipers who murmur that your jewels must be swimming in your wrinkles. How you've got no neck left for new baubles. How a queen shouldn't be flashy. How at your age such sparkling rubies clash with your cellulite. How, in short, with so many hungry, you flit from jewel to jewel. And even Julio Iglesias went cross-eyed from so much glare. How the checks you write for AIDS, which you sign so fervently, end up clutched by the same fingers that traffic the plague. And listen to this. They say that your piety is just for show. Entirely promotional, you see, like the campaign symbol, the little red ribbon that for all the poor faggots is actually plastic and made in Taiwan. And the rich with theirs in rubies and gold, looking more like a noose, that deadly necktie. A way of signaling who won the prize. You know how people are fighting over anything. They even said you're sick with it too, which explains the weight loss. It's enough to glance at photos from a few years ago when there wasn't a single dress you fit in. And now, so much love for the leper homosexuals, so much affection for Jackson, our pop music Christ, who sings, "Suffer the little children to come to me." How funny, this little enthusiasm of yours. So much love for the fags, just like Liza Minnelli, Barbara Streisand, and Maria Felix. All these stars who suckle locas like cuddly puppies. As if the faggots were another kind of charming ornament. As if they were the jewel of the Nile or the final gleam of a submerged Atlantis. How funny, and yet, for the lesbians, not a peep. When really the lesbians say it should be the other way around. First sisterly solidarity, then the locas. There's even a word for it in New York, for the rich and famous who run all over town with their hairstylists and courtiers. I think it's all trash, Liz. They're just jealous. Besides us fairies, we have the heart of a star and a soul of platinum, which is why I feel so close to you. Which is why you'll understand the reason I'm asking you this favor. If that's what you want, if it isn't too much trouble, I would be terminally in your debt. Remember, a tiny emerald, only a few carats, small enough that you barely notice when they take it out of the crown. Plus, you have those turquoises to look at, which outshine every other sparkle. I live in Chile. Mail it to me at the return address. I don't think you've ever been to this country. They say there's lots of money here, but you wouldn't know it, not from the look of things. Your admirer para siempre.
So listening to you, it's different reading it on the page. Listening to you, I think to myself, boy, I wish he was around right now. Uh,
Yeah.
just for everyone, what Gwen was kind enough to do is to share with me a clip on YouTube that has the great Lemebel reciting this particular piece. I'm going to put it in the chat, and also when we send out our thank you notes, we'll put it in there as well.
Yeah,
I think it's
really recommend.
really interesting, though. I love the way you said. I think your late friend would have been very, very proud of that. I think that's a beautiful way to start remembering him. But that the sharpness of the tongue is remarkably wonderful. And it makes me actually think about something else that we were both talking about. But I'll start first when it comes to the collection, if you don't mind, if we can get a little nitty-gritty about that. Given that um, many of these chronicles certainly did not all exist as one thing. You didn't translate an existing book into an existing book. In addition to being the translator, you had an editorial eye and you were structuring the collection as well. And I was wondering how that process worked for you, because that's you're a translator of different kinds of things, but that's very, very different than starting with one thing that existed and then thinking about how you want to do it.
Yeah. I think um there was, I guess, for the editorial aspect of it, it was thinking about, well, what I thought was really amazing and that I really wanted to translate. Um, and then there was a contextual aspect in terms of what translated
Right.
and also what would be useful context for readers in the sense that we were trying to keep it relatively light in terms of footnotes. And so were there cronicas that were good that could kind of do some of the explaining for us? Or in terms of, could you have a cronica that sort of spoke to the way people were disappeared? Or um, could you have a cronica that sort of gave some overview of the history or this aspect of the AIDS crisis or what a loca was, So there was that kind of contextualizing and just a sense of balance of covering his various um, themes, I guess, or preferred modes and preoccupations. And then I feel like there was something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten it. There was
Going anywhere, you'll remember.
yeah. Yeah, I guess those were the I mean there and then there was I mean there were things that just didn't work as well. So for example, in probably my favorite collection of his Le Coiffon, which is where a lot of the AIDS stories comes from. And I'm
Right.
saying AIDS, by the way, because he really insisted on saying AIDS rather than
HIV positive.
HIV AIDS, yeah. And in part because his stories are mostly set during the AIDS crisis, before there was really a reliable sort of set of medic.
Where there wasn't really this idea HIV positive and not AIDS. It was
Right,
just,
exactly. It was
this
it
is
was
what
all the
it
same thing
was.
because
This is what
there
was
was
happening. Yeah.
right. Um, but for example, his collection that is mostly about the AIDS crisis, like two-thirds about the AIDS crisis, but then there's a bunch of like kind of music criticism at the end. So it was like, well, that doesn't really like
Well,
people don't read music criticism from 30 years ago that much. So
not
there
yet.
was
Not
sort of
yet. You haven't
not
translated
yet.
it yet.
Yeah,
You never know. This is a
maybe
brand
people
new.
haven't. Yeah.
Someone needs to get on that right away.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's all interesting and valuable stuff, but at least for the idea of this kind of introductory collection that would provide this overview of him, we often um were sort of because they were collections in the way that they were almost like he'd write a bunch of stuff and then just bind it. So we were trying to kind of navigate between the stuff that interested us the most in each in each of the collections, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. We have some great questions in the chat, but I'm going to just ask one thing before we get into that, which is for you to talk a little bit about your own journey into translation. We definitely have some folks that are either fledgling translators or they might want to be
Mm.
translators. I've thought about it myself, although there are a lot of barriers to entry as far as I'm concerned for me. But maybe you might talk about how you initially got into this. I'm telling a tale out of school as you were writing the great American novel, suddenly
Oh
translation.
yeah. Well, I don't know if it was that, but I was,
I could.
yes, there was a long time where I was writing a novel, and that's still about halfway done. And at some point, Lemebel did concretize into a contract, and I had to put that down. But I really started translating in college very serendipitously. I really wanted to study abroad, but I was already kind of on full financial aid just to go to college. And, I was at Yale and I loved all my classes. I was like a total nerd. Like I just like loved school and didn't want to like miss a year of school basically and so I ended up applying for these fellowships that would send me, I figured out I could do language study or research and get kind of fellowship to do that if I just took a year off from school. So I actually was in um, China and Taiwan for 6 months studying Mandarin, which was the language I had learned as a child. And then went straight to Buenos Aires and did 6 months of a research project in Spanish, kind of a literary research project. And I was really kind of, by the time I got to Buenos Aires, I was quite confused, kind of linguistically, about what was going on
Just
in my
even
head.
directionally, you were confused, right?
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
looking at when you're looking at Asian languages, just directionally, it's off, and then not, and then language structure is so
It's
different.
so different. Yeah. And just like how you move through the world there, and it's all very different. And so, and I discovered that I wasn't sure that I liked academic research all that much when I was trying to do this research project. And I was secretly kind of trying to write fiction. Um, and I was also kind of trying to get better at Spanish. I had an amazing kind of actually, oh gosh, I'm going into way too much detail here, but one thing that my Chinese kind of intensive period taught me was the value of having one-on-one
Right,
language
right.
class. And so I started doing that and um, with a really amazing Spanish teacher, Sophia Bohm, maybe she is on this call right now, I don't know. But I was 20 and doing that, but trying to write fiction, but also trying to do this research project on Salvino Campo, who's an Argentine
Oh,
writer, and um, and I just was going crazy, and so I just started translating Ocampo to stay almost to like as the only possible resolution between those three kind of mutually exclusive goals or something. And and then I got and I did translate a couple of stories, and then I got back to college, and um, they had just hired a really incredible translator and teacher of translation, Peter Cole, um, to to teach, and he was leading an extremely rigorous workshop in literary translation, and so um, and then he really took me under his wing from there, and so. I mean, I really feel lucky in that I both came to translation totally organically, and that I then almost from the outset had just the highest quality mentorship in it. That feels like a really rare and lucky um, combination.
I have to tell you, I'm still chuckling in my head that you said I was writing fiction in secret, as if it's
Oh
like
yeah.
political screech. I was just writing. No one can
Yes.
hear the fiction. Oh my God. Um, so is there going to be, before I go on, I have to ask you, is there going to be a Chinese translation in the future for you?
Sometimes I wonder about it. Sometimes
Why not? I mean,
why not? Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know what?
there'd have to be quite a lot of dusting off of that one.
But
But
that's, I actually think you always learn better with language if you have a project with it. It's the same things you said about the
mm,
one-on-one. You're
yeah.
making me also think about one of my favorite Lemebel quotes. Well, it's hard to say favorite, but it speaks to me as a writer who sometimes feels that sense of being in a rut and not knowing how to write. And it said, I speak from my difference. And it's I think a very profoundly important thing for any of us who are in the creative world to celebrate and lean into the difference as opposed to anything else. And it looks like the reason I'm talking about that is that's kind of what you also did. Everything that was coming your way that was of interest, you leaned into that as opposed to saying, well, this hasn't been done this way before, well, who am I to be thinking I should be doing this? And that I think has been tremendously successful for you, certainly. We do have questions, and you know what's so sad about them? I've already seen a few of them, and they're better than mine, so I'm kind of like depressed about that. But I have no problem with that because these are all people who I admire so much. Um, I'm gonna start actually with Claudia Mauro and who said, so grateful to you, Gwendolyn, first for introducing me to Lemebel, second for your translation of queer culture of the time and presenting Lemebel's street level gay community and is calling out American English colonization of gay queer language, which is a very good point, Claudia. As an older queer, so grateful to read your translation and your brilliant notes of the translation. And this part we didn't actually talk about, so that's why I love Claudia. How and why were you drawn to translating Lemebel? We talked about how you kind of got there, but how did the Lemebel happen?
Well, thank you so much for that question. Also, I love mentioning that you're an older queer. I just feel like there's such a kind of like young um bias. I don't know, in like the way we talk and think about queerness. And so I really
In media, certainly,
yeah,
in modern media, yeah.
so I really it is quite meaningful to me um that you liked the work. Um and oh, why Lemavelle? Well, I mean, I didn't, when I started translating Lemavelle, I didn't know I was queer, but here we are, you know. I mean, certain that that factored in. I mean, it took me, I mean, even then it was a pretty slow process. I think,
That's awesome.
yeah,
That's just
I mean, um, I think that was certainly a factor. I think why Lemavelle was I talked a little bit in the introduction was that everyone seemed to be recommending his work to me. I was really looking for something like really hard and really amazing. I mean, and I found it, but I mean, it was kind of funny what my standard was. Almost kind of, I was looking for something like a really intense challenge, and also something that I would just love, which is actually a really hard thing to find. If I just think about the kinds of projects one comes across, you don't always love infinitely every project you do, you know. But people kept telling me to read Lemebel, and as I say in the intro, it was like 22-year-old kind of punk types would tell me, and the literati in Santiago would tell me, and then these kind of conservative seeming kind of older grandmas in the provinces would tell me to read him, and I couldn't, and I just thought, you know, in the US, I couldn't think of a single author that would appeal to that cross section of people, and so I was really interested in someone that would. Um,
that might be part of the problem with the US, but rather than there not being an author that speaks to everyone, maybe it has
yeah, I mean,
to do with us, right?
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I mean there are reasons for that. You know, he read on the radio, he, you know, um
He was multimedia in so many ways,
yes, so
right?
he really got his work out and he spoke for the working class in a way that you speak across a lot of divides that way.
Yeah.
And but then when I read him, what surprised me was that he was so almost avant-garde and so accessible at the same time, that he was in some ways he wasn't making easy work to appeal to a broad spectrum of people, and yet he was making work that spoke so directly to that broad spectrum of people. And that I thought was totally amazing. And then 4 years later I came out or whatever, but we can,
Totally amazing
um,
too, right? That's so.
yeah, yeah, totally.
So when I'll add on to what Claudia said. So when did you first start translating Lemebel with or without this concept of a book coming out of it? Like how long is the span of the pieces in this collection in terms of when you started it?
I started translating him in, I think, early 2016.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Life was different then.
life was different. Yeah. Um, and even like even like transness as something that was on in the cultural mainstream was not in the same way, you know. It transness has also really changed how we think and talk about it.
And language. Yeah, that I think that that's also uh, something important for people to know is how long some of these projects can end up taking. But you know what's kind of beautiful for me? You were talking about falling in love with it. Sometimes we fall in love with something, but if it takes the more time passes, we kind of fall out of it. But I love the fact that you kind of fell deeper and deeper and deeper into this, and that that love and care shows through every bit of the book. You know
Thank you.
what I mean? I have seen you talk about it, read about it. I understand how much it means to you personally, and that you do right by this, which you exceedingly have done. So I'm going to lead into that, what you just said, into an anonymous attendee who asked an anonymously very, very good question. Um, how do you think about what pronouns to use for Lemma? That is
Totally.
such an outstanding question, thinking about that time versus this time. Brilliant
No,
question.
I don't really have a good answer for that. I use he, and I don't think that's quite right. Um, I use when I tried to use she or they, to me, it just sort of sounds like an imposition from this era.
I understand that.
I think maybe the most accurate thing to do really would be to use multiple and be kind of inconsistent. Because that's what Lemavelle often did when addressing
Really?
another queer person.
Yeah.
He would
Okay,
often,
that's very
yeah.
interesting.
But then my ear, just the grammarian in me has trouble kind of switching back and forth. And and so I end up using he, um, which a lot of sort of texts that were made about him during his life use. But I don't think that that's necessarily
No,
the
I it's
right
not
choice.
disenfranchising, who
Yeah.
person was. So interesting because also Spanish is a gendered language. Like the
Yes.
Romantic
Well,
language,
it's
right?
there.
Like, that the objects even have genders,
Totally.
and then you have the more Asian languages, including Persian, which are non-gendered. I mean, I don't really have a word for he or she.
I
I
mean,
say that woman and that man, but
oh,
I never
interesting.
grew up using he or she.
I mean, I think maybe even more relevant to the pronoun question than, I mean, yes, the Spanish language is so gendered, and Lemavelle certainly has a lot of fun with that in the Chronic, like messing with that in the Chronicas. But I think maybe more relevant to the pronoun question is actually the fact that verbs are grammatically much stronger in Spanish. And
Yeah,
so you don't need to attach um, a, a pronoun to, once you've established who the referent is, who the subject is, you don't keep repeating the subject. That sounds weird.
right.
So you don't have this kind of pronoun like wheel of
Yeah,
repetition
yeah, yeah.
over and over again. So I don't feel that the pronoun carries as much weight in Spanish, and this is my opinion, and I don't think everyone shares it. I think in some ways the pronoun discourse has been the weight of it comes a little bit from is itself a little bit colonized, like from the way English works,
Mhm. Right,
onto
absolutely right.
hear discourses in languages that are less pronoun centric as languages, but um, I don't know I don't feel that it's quite right to like just use he for Lemavelle, and I just don't have a really good consistent alternative.
It's
But yeah, it's an ongoing question, and
it's
it's certainly not something.
interesting. It's so interesting that he used multiple ones, and I think that's kind of fantabulous. I mean, what are you
Yeah.
feeling today? What are you feeling like today? I love that question. Thank you. Also with us in the dead of night, in the UK is Hannah Weber, whom we talked about early on.
Oh,
Who-
hi.
The great Hannah Weber. Um, so some of this you've gone into, but I know you would probably want to say a little bit more about it. She said, "Thank you so much, Gwen, not just for being here this evening, but also for bringing Lemma to an Anglophone audience. Huzzah, huzzah. That's mine. Having given everyone a taste, do you plan on translating more? Is there a work of his beyond the Chronicas, or maybe a Chronica that did not make the collection you'd really like to share? And then there's so many absolute firecracker lines in the collection. Do you have any favorites?" Oof, that's a big one. So we already know that you're going to work on maybe a chapbook of his musical Chronicles. We've already
Oh,
seen that
yes, I'm
job.
already
I mean,
yeah,
I think a beautiful
70s
chapbook.
revival
Yeah,
music.
and it comes with a CD. Like, do you see? Can you tell I did marketing in my life?
Actually, Lemavelle would love that. His radio program, which is what you'd be sending out after the show, is
Okay,
after this
seriously.
is from his radio program, and it was called
I hope
Translator, which means song.
someone from Penguin on the line or something. But we need to do a CD and a Chronica insert.
That would actually be really fun.
We've said it here and we've thrown it into the universe. But let me go back to one of so what other types of things do you still think about? Which actually leads into another question for me, but go ahead and answer. What more of their work, of his work, and we'll use the he pronoun for now.
I should have prepared a better answer to this. There's
Yeah,
definitely been, you know, discussion among various
people.
about people at Penguin, the agent and stuff, whether there's more in the works, but there isn't anything
I mean,
definite yet. But yeah, I would love to do more.
well, Hannah wants it, and she's speaking for many, many people. So
Okay,
we're
great.
listening to that as well. Um, I'm going to allow you to say, I can't think of one right this second, but do you have any favorite lines that you just never forget?
Ooh,
You already heard
I
mine.
don't know if I do. I mean, there's just
It's
so
okay.
many that
That's
I
okay.
I I don't know if I do. Yeah, and I don't know if they work out of context. And that's actually something that's interesting about Le'Vevel is he has all these great lines. You think you could just read anything, and it's only I think in promoting this book. I mean, like doing readings and stuff that I'll try to excerpt something or cut some stuff to make a canonica shorter. And it's amazing how carefully everything is paced and built. And so that's actually something I feel like I've learned almost after the book was finished, how much, I mean, I think I knew it I knew it, but I've really come to appreciate it in a new way, how
Yeah,
much
it's
layers are
structured.
still
The
part
structure
of this
is
quest.
remarkable, and
Yeah.
also, and I felt it the way you were reading it in English, and I didn't say anything at the time. So much musicality
Mm.
to this, and the way that you were reading it, the way you were pausing for it, I felt that even though he reads it differently in Spanish, and we've put it into the chat. Um, we have one more question, and then after that, I have one question for you, and then I can just say huzzah, huzzah. Thank you so much for everything. Christoph Irmscher, who actually is also on our wonderful board, asked a very practical question out of curiosity. Many of the Chronicas have a beautiful cumulative lyrical intensity. Uh, you can see why he's a good critic, right? A rhythm that makes you want to read them loud. Your translator's note shows the care that you put into the details. How were you able to balance that attention to detail with getting the music of the whole passage right by going back and forth and revising and revising? Or did you feel the rhythm instantly and let it guide you as you went on?
Mm. That's a great
It is a
question.
great question.
Um, I think a lot of it was through revising and revising. I had a really extended process where I would open, when I was first translating Lemebel, I would open a notebook, a blank notebook in 2 pages, and I would write one sentence of Lemebel's at the top of the left-hand side. And then on the right, on the top of the right, I would just start writing versions in English, and I would fill the whole right-hand side with ways that that sentence could be written. And so it was sort of one sentence per page would get
Right.
trans. So I have just notebook upon notebook upon notebook of this. And so I could kind of hear the music, hear which ones fell and which ones there were so many. I think that I mean, it was nice that the technology of paper allowed me to hear the music a little bit through that. But I stuck with that process for a really long time. And towards the end, I actually wonder if I could have gotten away from that process a little bit sooner. And um, there, in the final months of translating, I really, everything coalesced. And I realized that I almost had to stop thinking of every single possible, 15 ways I could say this. And that the way that after all these years occurred to me was the right way, or like I had kind of channeled this energy. So like I had just grafted it upon me over so many years that I would translate it more truly if I let the energy happen too, as opposed to kind of um being so meticulous.
Well, there's a channeling, right? At
Oh
some
yeah,
point,
it was an
there's a
absolute
channeling,
channeling.
right?
Yeah,
You have to
and I
step aside and let him in a little bit.
yes, I absolutely had to. And then there were some really practical things too that really made a difference. For example, Idra Novi, who wrote the
Beautiful,
foreword to the book.
beautiful forward.
Um, and I think he really speaks in her foreword to one of the things you mentioned about him sort of just sounding like no one else in Chilean literature and what that the impact that had. I had her read the manuscript, and she called me and she was like, "Look, it's like pretty good, I guess." And but
I
there's some things
I
that like
really can
aren't
see Idris saying that. I
she was like, but there's some things that aren't quite working yet. And I don't remember what all of them were, but the one that really sticks with me is that, but they were all really, really on point notes. And um the one that really sticks with me is I had read Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, and something she talks about in the Odyssey, translating the Odyssey, is the way that there are these repetitions, rosy fingered dawn, and these that are these Homeric epithets,
Right.
and that she had taken these repetitions as an opportunity to translate them actually differently at different points um because instead of saying the same thing, she could say, okay, well, rosy fingered dawn actually leaves all these other nuances of the phrase in Greek out. So I'm going to use the repetition as an opportunity to put a different set of nuances down here. And so I was thinking, oh, that's a good idea with Lemebel, because Lemebel actually kind of repeats words a lot, uses the same word, and um, he's you know, loves a pun. And so maybe I can, use in this word, I can try to like catch this pun over here and that inference and this pun over there. And Ichiro was the one who pointed out, look, it's um it's really about this kind of wave of language that's happening, and the repetition is actually really important for the music of the language. And so I really cut down on my kind of trying to get
Newer.
trying to get nuance through different inferences when words were repeated or when yeah, and I sort of leaned into the repetition more. And I think that um, really helped with the music
I
of
mean, Idris is such a poet, so that's a very poetic thing too, right? Being
yeah,
able to do
yeah.
something with not making, and also Gertrude Stein wrote about repetition so much.
Mm,
But one thing that I do want to say that we haven't really said explicitly is, my God, the concept of translating puns is
yeah,
exciting, horrific, and being on a roller coaster in and of itself. I mean, I don't know how you approach that, and it's very funny. And so
good.
I may not, I don't, I know some languages, but I only know Spanish by way of Italian. But I was able to catch it, even though I'm sure it's very different in Spanish. It's going to get a different laugh in Spanish, but it also
Yeah,
got a big laugh in
good,
English.
good,
Um,
good.
so I'm going to end us up with just one thing, and then our darling Rebecca will come and allow you to go and have a drink of something. What's next? I mean, we talked a little bit about the fact that you really inhabited Lemebel and Lemebel inhabited you. And even now, a year later, you're still talking about the book, which is thank you so much on our behalf. But what are you working on that you want to talk about, other than the fact that we're coming out with this CD set and the music
Right.
does, which
Yeah,
I
and
think,
I think it should actually also come with like a Discman or something and like
oh,
sort of
not old enough to know what a
really kind of
Discman
scratchy
is.
headphones that you wear.
Yeah. Oh yeah, those like
Or
to
maybe
keep
a
it in
tape
like
deck even. I think that would
I
actually be
I
cool.
have tape decks and I have casingles, and there's going to be four people in the audience who know what a casingle is, but I do have
Like
a
a
casingle.
single. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have nothing to play it on, but I have casingles. No, but what do you and also other than the new Mandarin, and I assume it was Mandarin you were studying, the new
Yes.
Mandarin book that you're translating.
Yes, other
We've
than
given you
that.
so many jobs right now, Gwen. I don't know how you're wasting so much time with us right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, well, I've also given myself a lot of jobs. I mean, it did take a while to kind of find my footing again after Lemavelle because it was so complete as a project that um it was hard to know what to do next. The novel is still in the works, which is
Yes,
exciting.
excellent.
And what I'm really excited, and there is another translation project that I is might happen. Well, we will see. We will see.
We don't want to jinx it.
I can't actually really talk about it. Yeah, but because it's not far from definite, but potentially a cool translation project. And I'm really excited about actually a nonfiction project that I've just sort of
Oh,
had the idea for, and I actually have had it marked in my mind for many years as like book four, like this is what I'm going to write in my 40s and 50s or something. But I've decided to just write it right now. And so I'm really excited about
it's in English.
it's
English
in
and
English.
okay.
Yeah, and it's funny, but I think it's not totally unrelated to Lemavelle in the sense that um, and I was working on this novel and then I put it down in part for Lemavelle, in part because I was like, well, so much of what I know about writing has come from translation, and so much of my translation experience is Lemavelle. Like, I really owe Lemavelle like a book. Like I owe like I need to. This is like I have apprenticed myself to Lemavelle, and I need to
Mhm.
carry that apprenticeship through in a way
Mhm.
that also gives Lemavelle the value of that in the world, if that makes sense.
That's
Um,
beautiful. It's beautiful.
and I was really thinking of that in terms of fiction, and you could argue that these stories really read like stories. But I think, of course, coming out the other side of um, that sort of full apprenticeship and surrender to Lemavelle is that I think I have a lot of ideas about what writing
I love it.
nonfiction and writing about life now and life historically might look like. So I think the nonfiction door is the nonfiction God is
That's
knocking.
you're going to be speaking to your differences, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't wait to hear about that. And I will say one more thing is that we're really excited that the Barris is a cross genre award because we can celebrate books like A Last Supper of Queer Apostles and many other books that don't fall particularly into a genre, but are perfect exactly as they are, much like this book.
Or maybe don't fall into like American genres, but are of a genre.
Actually, that's absolutely right. In other cultures, genre
Yeah.
isn't the same as here, but my undying thanks, Gwen, for all the time you shared for this beautiful book, and Mylin for translating us. But back to my great partner, Rebecca.
Yes, I also want to say thank you. Thank you to all of the attendees. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your great questions. And thank you, Gwendolyn, for joining us, and Mylin for the translation. And thank you to Mandana Chaffa, who organized this interview and asked such great questions. So I enjoyed listening to this very much. Thank you all. I just want to quickly draw your attention to our next NBCC event, which is going to be on Monday, October 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. NBCC President Adam Dalva will lead a session called Criticism 101 Interviewing Fundamentals. So it's free for NBCC members, and there's a link in the chat for non-NBCC members that you can register. So we hope to see you there. And that is all. I wish all of you a great evening.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.